Hi, and welcome to Disability Talk with Marianne. I am your host, Marianne Mahoney. I am a 25-year-old woman from the Boston area who was born with spina bifida. On this podcast, I interview people from the disability community to understand the issues that matter to people who live with a disability, care for people with disabilities, or work to support the needs of the community. In this episode, I interview a very good friend of mine, Alicia Bowman, who has been a city councilor in my hometown, Newton, Massachusetts. Hi, Alicia. Thank you for being on my show. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm Alicia Bowman. I have known you. I might start there. I've known you, Marianne, since you first moved to Newton. You used to be my neighbor right around the corner, and now you're my neighbor the other direction. I have lived in Newton for 27 years. I have three children, who one of whom was you grew up with as well, and a husband who grew up in Newton himself. And I've been very active, at least for the last 20 years, on issues concerning students, walkability in our community. I started an organization called Safe Routes to School that focuses on promoting walkability, rollability, safety, better transportation choices for kids getting to school. I was previously president of Bike Newton for many years. And for the past 4 years, I've been a counselor on the Newton City Council, uh, focused on a lot of things, but especially around housing and transportation. And really, one of my big things that I always tried to work on that is to see how I might make our community more livable and welcoming for people with disabilities. So I spent, I think, a fair amount of my energy on that, trying to get more accessible units built and attending all the Commission on Disability meetings to see how I might help with their agenda. But that's a little bit about me. But as of January 1st, I'm no longer on the council, so I have a little extra time on my hands. So I think you caught me at a good time to come talk about disability in our community.
Can you tell me what you do for work?
So, what I did do for work was on the city council. Now I'm trying to figure out what my next step is. One thing I've been very passionate about for many years is housing. And I've been passionate about transportation for a long time, but when my in-laws, who also lived in Newton, and my father-in-law was actually a teacher at Newton North High School for many years, when they could no longer safely get up and down the stairs in their house because of they were fragile and getting older, and they needed really one floor living, and they wanted to stay in Newton, someplace where they could walk to the grocery store and go to the Walgreens, someplace they went every day, favorite place, and a coffee shop and a park. I started looking around Newton trying to find them someplace to live, and there really weren't that many options and really nothing that fit their need. And I began to start to understand some of the housing challenges that we face. So I think my next step for work will definitely be something on housing. And I hope housing and keeping in mind the need for more housing that works for people as they age and people with disabilities, because it is our fastest growing population and really is something that will impact people really at some point in their life. And we don't have nearly enough housing, and we don't have nearly enough housing in the right places, too. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. I really, as someone who strongly supports the idea of more housing where people can walk out the front door or roll out the front door and go to lunch or go to the CVS or go get something to go to the grocery store or just go to a park and some open space. I feel like too frequently housing gets built like the new housing in Wellesley. It's on the edge of 128 and Route 9. Like putting 1,000 people out there isn't as helpful as putting some people, say, in Newton Center. So I'd like to see maybe stay involved with how we do that, how we build more housing that helps everyone live active, independent, rich lives.
I definitely think that housing is a big not issue, but topic for people who are wheelchair bound because, like, first you have to, I don't know the exact process, but you have to look for a house and then you have to figure out like where you want to live and I it just takes a lot of steps
Right.
and I feel like I'm really grateful for people who work together to put their heads together to make housing for the happen
Yeah.
because I the in a group home like you it's more like sociable. Can't really speak to that yet, but I feel like when we're at home we're just with our family and we see them every day
Yeah.
and that's great, but I feel like it's definitely great to branch out and spread your wings, so to speak, and live with other people who are actually more close in age to you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I have no doubt in your next situation, Marianne, that you are going to love it. It's gonna be a whole new chapter. So I look forward to hearing more about that.
yes, I am so excited about it.
Yeah.
And the young woman I'm going to be living with, one of them, incredible. She's a sister, she's the sister of one of my mom's friends, and she and I get along so well.
Oh,
And
nice.
I just see us like building a very strong relationship and friendship.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned the steps to create housing. In that particular type of housing you're talking about, the more congregate living, group home. We need a better name of group home. That does not sound good. Community living solutions or others. It's really quite a lot that needs to go into that. It's expensive to figure out. You often have to do much to upgrade the property to make it work for the individual residents and to meet local building codes. And you unfortunately also frequently run into a public process working with and trying to get approval from cities or towns and neighbors. And in a way that feels, I can tell you as a former public official, it feels really bad when it's like we should all be supporting and saying, "Yay, it's lovely that a group of people are going to come live in my neighborhood and have access to things in our neighborhood and be supportive of that." And unfortunately, we don't always see that. Maybe those are good stories for offline. I can share them or maybe a future podcast, but yeah.
Yeah,
So, this many years, with 30 years after the American with Disabilities Act has passed, we still have a long way to go in accommodations and housing and transportation and so many other things. But
yeah. What is your current involvement in working with the disabled community?
I don't have an official role at the moment, but I will continue to advocate, I think, in Newton and beyond for policies that I think will be very supportive for people with disabilities. One, I think housing is really critical. It's hard to have, we don't have enough housing for anybody, but we certainly don't have enough housing for people with disabilities. And new housing, it's really, I can't stress enough the importance of us building affordable, accessible housing, and that's going to be built with new housing. So that's the direction that's going to go. So I think some more support at the state level for increasing housing and getting more housing built, like in communities where you don't have to rely on a car or somebody driving you because so many people with disabilities don't drive, right? And someplace where you can still remain active. That was the struggle we had with my in-laws, is I could find them a place to live and even in Newton, but they didn't have a place to go. They left the apartment building. Where are they going? Like it's a mile or 2 miles from anything, and we needed them to stop driving. Everybody needed them to stop driving. They still would be dependent on us to come and pick them up and take them places and go places, and that's not the life they wanted to live. There's an interesting group you asked about that. There's a group of residents that came together called Inclusive Design Newton that
Mhm.
they're trying to change the conversation around making our city more accessible. And by actually showing people who don't have disabilities how difficult it is to get around our city. So they did a big demonstration back in the fall of one of your favorite intersections, yours and your father's. You had written me about the intersection in Newton Center of Beacon Langley and Sumner Street and how difficult that is to get through in a wheelchair. And they actually had people like myself, elected officials, and people from DPW and planning from the city departments actually get in a wheelchair and try to cross the street. It was not a pretty sight. It was not easy. It was not safe. If we didn't have people there to do things like push buttons and help us because there are lots of places where it's not smooth, it's too steep, certainly not ADA compliant. I think there's some room in something like that, but allowing more accessory dwelling units. We have one person I might suggest. I know you're looking for more people on your podcast, but we have a former neighbor who built an accessory dwelling unit for their now adult child. And frequently it's a really great way for someone to have independence, but to make accessible housing close by. And so I think promoting not every community allows accessory dwelling units, which is accessory dwelling units, say a small house or that is built on the same property, but it's separate from the main home. And that's a great way to get some independence for people. So we'll see, but a lot to be
And
done.
if you wouldn't mind repeating, thank you for that information. If you wouldn't mind repeating, what was that group called
Oh,
that you had mentioned?
the group is called Inclusive Design Newton. And the group of people who are involved in that would actually make a great podcast. I think they would be fabulous. I'll send you their contact information afterwards, but include some people like Robert Solomon, who's been a longtime advocate for safer streets in our city. He is also in a wheelchair. And Lucia Dolan, your former neighbor,
Mhm.
and yeah, and some others. Jen Martin, who's head of Safe Routes to School, and some others. It's a great resident-led organization people who care about getting the city going on fixing the built infrastructure of our city to make it more accessible.
Mm. Cool. Do you think cities are very accessible, mostly accessible, or not at all accessible? And then I'll ask the second part of the question after.
Okay. I think most cities in the United States are not accessible, not nearly where we should be 30 plus years after the American Disabilities Act was passed. I see the struggles. It really is how I got into advocacy in the first place in the city, not because I had a child with a disability, but I was trying to push a double stroller. And there were so many places without curb cuts, without sidewalks on major roads. You think I'd be able to walk from my house to the library on a continuous sidewalk because I live close to the library, but no, that's not the case. And then you start doing things like trying to help, a parent or an in-law with who's in a walker and trying to figure out how to get from a parking lot to a doctor's appointment and realize how much is missing. But I think I until you go someplace that's really accessible, I think most people don't realize. I've been to amazing cities like Copenhagen that are just people with disabilities are in on bikes, on motorized bikes. Their whole family is on the little motorized bike that they're on. They got the kids, they got the groceries, they got their husband, and they're just, they're going along and safe and happy. And until you see the sort of buses that anybody can roll onto, whether you're pushing a stroller, pulling a shopping cart, or you're in a wheelchair, you can just roll right on the bus without having to have the bus driver get out and lower the thing, get on. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe they're on the bus and then they can't lower it again. I've seen that happen. Um, just the ramps that replace stairs. There's so much that we could do in this country, and we're just not there.
Yeah, I definitely feel like there are crazy drivers out there to begin with. And
There are.
I'm not saying that you're a crazy driver,
No.
but I definitely feel like people need to definitely pay attention when they're driving, especially like when they're about to go over a crosswalk and they see, oh, there's somebody about to cross a crosswalk. Let me stop for them. Let me slow down for them.
That's not the end.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's just nerve wracking to see people speeding down the street and having to slam on their brakes for somebody crossing the crosswalk. I can't imagine how many accidents happen at crosswalks because of people not slamming on their brakes fast enough
Yeah.
and hitting people. But it's, yeah, I definitely feel like people need to drink more coffee.
Maybe less coffee or kombucha. Yeah, I was just thinking about that time. Marianne, do you remember being in Newton Center when you were in middle school with me and Camille? I think we're doing a Girl Scout thing. Marianne used to be my Girl Scout, when I was a troop leader, but we were crossing the street in Newton Center, and you and me and Camille were in the crosswalk, and the cars continued to drive around us as if we were like a sign in the middle of the road. Didn't stop and wait for us to cross the street. Like, we are in the street. And that intersection now has been improved with what they call bump outs to shorten the crosswalk to make it very difficult for a car. The cars have to stop for pedestrians. Pedestrians are more visible. They have to stop for them when they're crossing. And whenever I hear someone complain about that crosswalk, I tell them the story about how you and I and Camille were stuck in the middle of the road. Camille and I had our hands up trying to get the drivers to stop, and it's these are important things. And I think this is what good communities that are making prioritizing the health and wellness of everybody in the city are doing. They're making the crosswalks safer. They're saying, you know what, if we force the drivers to slow down a little bit, it'll be fine. They'll be fine. They'll get where they're going 10 seconds later. But meanwhile, people crossing the street are safer. People in wheelchairs feel more in control and safer crossing the street. People can see them and they're not going to get stuck in a rut crossing down and it'll be good. So I think that's what other communities we're seeing that more and more across the country, and we have some of it going on in Newton, but we need a lot more. We have entire sections of the city that are impossible to navigate in a wheelchair.
Yeah, I definitely. I sorry. What were you gonna
No,
say?
I was just gonna put one positive thing. I was gonna put a plug into the Newton Parks and Rec department that has really been doing such an amazing job in prioritizing accessibility in the parks. When they put together the open space plan a few years ago, it actually was one of the top priorities, and that actually came from residents. It was in those meetings where residents were saying, "We need more accessible parks. I want to be able to bring my parents," or they listed what they needed, and accessibility was one of the top goals. And whether it's I don't know if you've been to the new path at Livingston Cove, at Crystal Lake, it's amazing. I'm happy to join you there sometime when it's a little warmer and you can see what's been done to make it accessible, or the paths along the Charles River that the city has been investing in.
Why don't we plan a date for
Yeah.
when there's a snowstorm?
That would be good. Livingston Cove, they've just been doing a really great job at prioritizing that. So I'm proud of the work that they've done. The city has done on that regards.
Thank you for that. Do you going back to my question
Yeah.
about, do you think cities are very accessible? How do you think, and do you think there is a way that they can be improved?
Absolutely. So I think we've talked about some of them. I think understanding and investing in upgrades in public spaces, parks, open space. Everybody deserves to get out to a park and enjoy nature and making those accessible. I think that's really important. I think that it's important that we think about Newton Center, our only accessible Green Line station in the city, I think. Maybe Riverside, but certainly is an accessible station. Yet half a block away from the station, there are lots of you can't get to the station accessibly easily, if you're a person in a wheelchair. The curb cuts don't exist, the road is, or the sidewalk is slanted and bumpy, and it's gonna be very difficult to get there. So we've done pieces of it, but we really need to make a network of making it accessible, making sure that people and just start to invest in understanding what needs to be done in these pieces. I think I can't beat the housing drum enough. We need great to make our sidewalks and everything accessible, but if people with a disability don't have a place to live nearby that they can also afford, that I don't know that we've helped as much as we need to. And I think there's just so much that could be done from that aspect. I think a lot of people think, okay, I'm making some place accessible because I put in a accessible parking spot. And those are important too, but recognize that that's not servicing everybody who has a disability. I think there's a lot, and it's a tough conversation. I've had it with friends who are disabled or care for disabled people. I think investing in the kind of infrastructure that we see in places like Copenhagen, where you have separated, I call them mobility lanes, bike lanes. I'm a big fan of bike lanes, but if we start to think about them as mobility lanes and say the
Mhm.
things that we do to make it safer to bike, separating bikes from cars now enables somebody to be in a motorized wheelchair, to be in the bike lane and traveling just as fast as the bikes and taking up the same amount of space, but they can maneuver. And today, it's not uncommon for me to see somebody in a motorized wheelchair in the middle of Walnut Street. I have a picture back
Mhm.
from a few years ago of a gentleman who went shopping at Star Market in Newtonville, and he was on his way back to Newton Highlands in the middle of Walnut Street, being passed by trucks in the rain with his groceries on the back of his car. That shouldn't be the solution. We talk a lot about it in Newton about upgrading our public transportation, so the MBTA, keeping them on task to upgrade the Green Line. They have plans for that, as well as the commuter rail. It might not be funded in my lifetime or your lifetime, but it needs to be accessible, and certainly two floors of stairs and no elevator and having to walk upstairs to get on the train is not accessible. So I think investing in that type of infrastructure is really critical to getting us to a place, because we're not an accessible community until people can live independently, till
Mhm.
anybody who can live independently and rich lives. It's We have inclusive schools. Let's have inclusive communities that go beyond the schools, right? And
Mhm.
so much we can do.
Yeah. You mentioned and I am a 50-50 fan of the ride. There are things that I do love about it and things that I don't love
Right.
about it. Most importantly, they they are not they come so they give you the way it works is I either go online or call to book my
Mhm.
rides and then the night before I can either go online or I get a message from the ride saying, "Oh, your ride is coming between 9 and 9:30,"
Right.
which it's great that they give you a heads up that they're coming, but I definitely think that I definitely wish that, and I know it's not something that I can control, but I wish they could come like when I wanted them to
Like,
come.
you didn't have to build in an hour or 2 on either end of your task, or whatever you're doing to make sure you got there on time. I know, Marianne. It's an awful
Well,
system. Yeah,
yeah, and I know sometimes they come super early and my day program that I go to
right,
doesn't open until 9 o'clock in the morning.
right,
And I'll get sometimes I'll get calls being like, "Your ride is on its way." And then I end up having to cancel it because it's it's too early for me to
right,
get picked up. And you can't, and I also wish there was a way to online for it to tell you, "Okay, your ride is between this time and this time. The driver has another customer that they need to pick up."
right.
because you don't know that until the ride driver shows up and says, "Hey, I have another pickup or a drop off," and then they run late, and then I end up getting to my point B late,
Right.
and it's just I wish they had a better system for
Yeah.
that.
So I think the ride in concept to fill in the holes where can't they haven't yet made things accessible it's a good first step. But really, ideally, what we're going to do to make your lives and other people who have your same sort of limitations better is to create more housing in places where you're not dependent on this one. Maybe the ride is the exception, and maybe the regular way you get the most frequent way you get around is imagine living someplace where you roll out the front door or down an elevator and go right into a T station, and the T station takes you to the hospital if you're going to go for a doctor's appointment, or takes you into Boston so you can go to the symphony, or takes you to work, and you don't have to you can go out your front door and go to the grocery store or meet friends for coffee, and that's how we make your lives better. Yeah, like, that seems like a better solution than trying to figure out, do we invest more in I I don't know that we could ever put enough the ride vehicles in place to make that the best system. I think the best system is figuring out the other end of it, just making lovely, walkable, livable communities where most the things you need are close by, that you can do it on your own stand. You shouldn't have to make an appointment with somebody to go to the grocery store, right? Schedule out. Nobody else has to like say, I need to book ahead 3 days to do this. I don't have to think about that. That's what I think would be a better solution. And it would benefit just not you. It would benefit everybody. It would benefit people who are trying to save money. Cars are super expensive. Like if you want to live in a one car household, or you have working parents, to be able to have a situation where kids can walk home from school by themselves and, I don't know, get themselves to music lessons and do those things without parents having to come home and take care of them. I think there's a lot to be said for that. But
Mhm.
I think there's a lot more, I feel like there's a lot more independence for people with disabilities in communities where things are closer at hand.
I was definitely gonna bring that up. Like, I definitely, when the ride doesn't show up, I often turn to Uber, which is amazing. They do have WAV, which is wheelchair accessible
Yeah,
vans, and it's I've had some great experiences and some not so great experiences,
yeah,
and I feel like they able to speak up and say, "Hey, this driver is not uh, doing their job right."
right,
Like he's I had this one time where I was out to dinner with a friend, and I told my dad that I was gonna Uber home, and he ended up having to come get me because the my Uber driver, he was just sitting in a parking lot and not
right,
like getting closer to me.
right,
And so I had to report him, and I've had one of the supervisors drive me a couple of times, and they said that they had to let the guy go because he wasn't doing his job, and I feel like that's not very professional,
right.
especially if you're taking care of somebody with a disability and they needed to get from point A to point B, and you're just sitting in a parking lot,
No.
not getting to them.
Is this Numo or this is Uber?
Uber,
Uber, okay. And have you
yeah.
used Numo? Does that work for you?
I have not used Numo. What's
Okay.
that?
Numo is a program that the city runs. It's Uber-like service. I just don't know. I should know. I feel like I should know, but it provides Uber level service, and I just don't know. I've seen them pick up people with wheelchairs, but I don't know that they were people who could transfer out of the wheelchair themselves as opposed to staying in a wheelchair. So I don't know that it has the same level of service, but so it provides and it's like shared rides around the city. I feel like maybe that's upping Numo to have that sort of service would be great too. So it will be an alternative to the ride and maybe one that's maybe a little more responsive to people in Newton because it's paid for by Newton. That should be something. That's something you were looking for something we could do. We could figure out a way to get Numo to have more service like the ride. That would be we can talk about that offline, but we'll figure that out. I'll have to learn a little bit more about that.
If somebody needed to file a report or a complaint, I know I've done that before,
Mhm.
about a specific area in the community. How would they go about it? What resources are provided by the city to report or follow up?
So the city has currently, it's called 311. It used to have an app, but the app is
Mm.
no longer supported. I think they're in the process of trying to replace the system, or maybe they even just did. So I've like in my month of not being on the council, I stopped paying attention to some of this stuff, but I really should look that one up. But the city can call customer service. So call in from your landline 311 or 617-796-1000 and report to the city what the issue is. And they track it. This is similar to what we did when you wanted that sidewalk replaced by Mason Rice. Remember when you came to vote and
Mhm.
you couldn't get down the sidewalk because it was bumpy and you told me about it and I reported it on 311 and it got replaced and now it's all smooth and safe for people. It's so that's the current system. So
Cool. Do you feel like people with disabilities are safe in the city? And do you think there can be a way to indicate to others that there are wheelchairs in the area?
all right. So the first piece, I think everybody in the city is primarily safe. I'm not worried about anything, eh, but I don't feel good about the accessibility. So I do worry about bumpy sidewalks and people if they're in a wheelchair or a walker tripping and falling. So I don't know. I can see that, but I have a scar on my wrist where I fell, not in Newton, but I broke my wrist. Actually, I broke both wrists. So I have a little bit of appreciation for what it's like. This happened this past summer. Um, to be really dependent on thank God I have a husband, a lovely husband who took really good care of me. For 8 weeks, I couldn't shower by myself. I couldn't change. It was a mess. My hair was never like not a good situation with the hair. He stopped at blow drying. He wasn't going to blow dry my hair, but it's in that process I learned so much. Heard from so many people who had just everyday people who tripped and fell and hurt themselves or someone in a wheelchair or hit a bump and fell out of their wheelchair. So I do worry about things like that. And I think that concept of where we tell people there's a we have signs there are official signs that are like blind person nearby so people can watch out for them. Every every block has somebody who has some sort of physical limitation. I think just because they're older or young, I just feel like could we put up a sign? Yeah, I'm just not sure. I think we'd be better spent just trying to fix all the issues that we identify and trying to think more like making our community safer. Everybody who's walking, just regular person we need to be smooth so the person just walking down the street doesn't trip and fall and break their wrist or hurt their knee and that would also make it safer for people in wheelchairs. We ought to fix the crosswalks to make them safer so that kids crossing the street are safer. I was driving today and I'm a very observant, safe driver. And I saw this kid, he's looking down at his phone and he's listening to music. He's got his headphones in and he just crossed the street without looking to see if anybody was driving and pulling up to him. If that had been a raised crosswalk, it would have made it safer for people in wheelchairs and easier because it's nice and smooth and it would have forced me as a driver to actually stop at the stop sign, right? A lot of drivers roll through the stop sign. They're more looking for cars and not looking for people. So I think the
Mm.
real issue is we should be designing our infrastructure to force to be safe, to force the cars, which are if there were no cars, we'd all be safe and easy. It's I think we just to force better behavior, just make sure the cars can't go too fast and they have to stop at stop signs. And I think those are better strategies.
Yeah, I definitely feel bad for I don't understand people who cross the street with their headphones on and don't pay attention to the road. It's crazy.
Yes.
And
But that shouldn't be, if they make a mistake, like, that shouldn't lead them to getting hit and killed. That's why I feel like the responsibility, even though that person wasn't paying attention, the responsibility is still on me as driver to be paying attention for them, because I'm the one who's driving the heavy vehicle, that I should be paying that much attention, because there could be somebody who's holding their mother's hand and they break away and they run into the street. I should be driving in a way that enables me the best chance to make sure I'm stopping for that person. So speeding and not paying attention and I think distracted drivers are a much bigger problem than distracted pedestrians. I think too many people are talking on the phone and looking at their radio dials. I don't know. Or probably more, not less radio dials and more their Spotify list or whatever.
nice. I really appreciate you taking this hour out of your day to be on my podcast. It's such a pleasure having you and getting to see your beautiful face. And this is so much fun for me, and because it's getting to hear people's stories about accessibility and disability. It's definitely a fun way to learn more about people.